that mean,
Yes.
I was gonna ask, does that mean stop record, stop video?
If you want to, I think it's less distracting, but
Okay,
definitely muting. We're definitely going to mute
Okay.
because sometimes stray noises come.
Yeah, I got.
Okay.
Okay.
And then Shari, it's all yours now. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. If you have questions, if you have comments, you want to provide some input, please feel free to interrupt me. I do best when I'm doing give and take, so feel free. So I'm going to apologize for the quality of this picture, but it was taken in 1972. I'm the little Buddha looking one. My mom was the oldest of 6 kids, and the way the timing worked out, her youngest brother was closer to my age than to her age. So my uncle, Breen, and I spent a lot of our childhood together. My uncle was fun. He liked to play with me. He didn't want to do the dishes either. And it never occurred to me that Down syndrome was part of his life. I didn't understand that I was being given a gift. Sorry. Okay, now it's working. Every day, advocacy was being modeled in front of me. I didn't know my grandmother spoke before the Ohio legislature on the rights of people with Down syndrome. I didn't know that my aunt was studying special education. I just knew that in a world that told my grandparents that my uncle wasn't allowed to go to school, that my grandmother taught him to read and write. My grandmother's example has served me very well. As a mother of 2 daughters with support needs, I have made advocacy both my professional and my personal mission. I've learned so much through training, through books and study and personal experience. But what my grandmother taught me is the foundation of it all. All people deserve to be treated as people. So I have some things to share with you tonight that I hope will be helpful. Please feel free, interrupt, ask questions, use the chat. Deb, if you could monitor the chat, I would really appreciate that. I do want this to be part of a conversation. I'm going to start with some legal basics and then talk a little bit about how to implement your child's rights. Some of this you may already know, some of this you may not know, but bear with me because we all know different things. The first and most important part to remember is that you are not imagining it. The public school system is designed to educate typically developing students. In Ohio, each student is allocated roughly $13,000. It's a little higher in urban areas. Any additional support requires additional funds. Assuming a positive intent from public officials, they are faced with a huge financial dilemma. They are legally required to provide all children with free public education. All children, not just the typical children. And simply put, our kids cost more to educate. You see a difficulty, the schools see a difficulty, and it's very hard to find a way to bridge the difficulty. Free and appropriate public education is the law. Both federal and state law mandates that our students must be provided with free and appropriate public education. It is the bedrock of special education law. When in doubt, always come back to, is this appropriate for my child? Where the student is educated is a large part of appropriate education. The law also mandates that every student must be educated in the least restrictive environment. It's all about making sure that students with disabilities are educated alongside their typical peers as much as possible. However, LRE doesn't mean that all students are in the general education setting at all times. Again, we come back to what is appropriate for my student. You are vital to making decisions about your child's education, and the district must allow your voice to be heard. The law says that the school must include you in meetings about your child and in decisions regarding placement. You are the voice for your child. As the voice of your child, be prepared. You are going to be that parent. The one who questions, the one who sometimes contradicts, the one who texts the teacher every single day. It's never going to go away. Embrace it. And you need to educate the educators. I wish that wasn't true. I have a client who has Tourette's and misophonia. How is that going to work in a general education setting? Type 1 diabetes and how it can affect behavior. Teachers aren't going to know about that. Down syndrome and autism are just now beginning to be understood in combination by doctors. My youngest child is autistic, but she also has ADHD, sensory processing disorder, dyspraxia, and a hypoxic brain injury that caused short-term auditory memory loss. There is no way I could expect a gen ed teacher to understand the effects of neonatal hypoxia, I can't even say it, on a child. So what I recommend is being the expert and bringing in experts. If you need to get your team together and have them sit down with someone who does understand neonatal hypoxia, do that. Schedule a meeting. Have that happen. So I've mentioned FAPE, and I've mentioned LRE, and I've mentioned your right to be heard. Those are the foundations of law, but how do you put that into practice? We need to start with the most important rule. If it's not in writing, it didn't happen. Make a vow to yourself here and now, to yourself and to your child. You will save every document, every letter, every text. If the school sends it to you or you send it to them, invest in 3-ring binders. You're going to need them. If you have a chat with a teacher in the hallway after school and it has anything to do with your child's education, follow up with an email that same day just to say, hey, I wanted to make sure we're on the same page regarding what we talked about today. That way, there's a record of we talked, this is what we said, and if the teacher doesn't understand it that way, they have an opportunity to come back and say so. Remember that teachers are some of the most busy and overworked people in the world. It is not inconceivable that they would talk to you, leave to go to a meeting, and entirely forget the conversation. The same thing applies to meetings, any meetings. If it's not written down, it didn't happen. Anything that is said or discussed in a meeting needs to be written down. So, where do you start? From, I think my child needs special education support, to, I think something is very wrong, start with your intervention specialist. If you don't have an intervention specialist, start with your school psych. Even if that person isn't the right person, they will know who to forward your message to get you the appropriate response. Send your message. If you don't have a response within a week, CC the principal. If you still don't have a response, contact your Board of Education and ask them who is the Director of Pupil Services. Sometimes it's called something else, but they'll know what you mean. Get the email for the Director of Pupil Services and then copy that person on the forwarded message. keep all your communication to the point. Say what you mean and say why you need it. So I think Jiro may have a reading disability. I need a formal meeting to discuss that. Give a suggestion for a time frame, maybe some available dates for you, and then get that message out just that much. You can discuss what you need to discuss in the meeting. Bring and send documentation, all the documentation that you can get from doctors. I made a list here. Doctors, psychiatric professionals, therapists, tutors, OTs, PTs, speech therapists, counselors, therapy, music therapy, hippotherapy, therapeutic camp. And if it has goals like some camps do in the summer, make sure that you attach progress reports. You want to provide the school with as much information about the diagnosis as you possibly can. You can, but do not have to, provide medication information. That is your decision. I always think it's a good idea because if my child is in school and suddenly starts to act in a way that isn't typical, I want someone to know that she's taking a new medication and maybe that has affected her. Again, that is your decision and the school cannot ask you about medications. Limit your list. Make a list of no more than 3 things you want to make sure are covered in the meeting. It is not feasible that you are going to get more than that done in 1 hour, which is probably the amount of time you're going to have. You can have follow-up meetings, but stick to your agenda and make sure that those things get covered. Send the list ahead of time to the school so that they know what you want to talk about and they are prepared to discuss it. You don't want to blindside them where they think they're talking about one thing, you think you're talking about something else. You're just wasting everyone's time. Bring backup. You can take anyone with you want to a meeting. Your mom, your neighbor, your kid's camp counselor, whoever. If your district has a parent mentor, I strongly suggest that you take the parent mentor. They will go with you to meetings if you ask them. That is a free service to you. Whoever goes with you can take notes, can make sure that everything on your list gets covered, and can help out on a list of who was there, what that person's job is. So if you don't know who Amy Kerr Young is, it's nice that the parent mentor or your mom can write down, this person is the occupational therapist. Amy, I just made you an occupational therapist for this example.
That was
I
the
can do it.
easiest.
I can do it. No problem.
There is a caveat to this rule. If you bring a lawyer, you have to tell the school you're bringing a lawyer, and they will bring a lawyer too. And after that, the school will only work through lawyers with you. As a public service announcement and shameless self-promotion, advocates are much cheaper. We can do almost everything that a lawyer can do. And the school does not get a lawyer involved if an advocate shows up. This shameless plug brought to you by Northeast Ohio Advocates. Remember that it is your child's meeting and you are your child's voice. You are in control of the meeting. There are no dumb questions. Ask everything. Tell them that you don't know what that acronym means and ask them to explain it to you. The first time I went into a meeting about my youngest daughter, all I heard in my ears was buzzing. I did not process anything that these people were saying. What I've learned is when in doubt, ask, how will that affect my child during the school day? How will that affect my child in the classroom? It's a good way when you are unsure to make the person stop and explain what they will be doing. If you have no idea what occupational therapy is, say so. Make them explain it to you. It's different at school than it is outside of school. So if you have questions, make sure you understand that. Keep in mind, you are the expert in your child. There is no other expert in that room in your child. The team and your child need you to play the very large and most important role in that meeting. Be that voice in the conversation, the expert in your child. Know who needs to be in the meeting. If they aren't, end the meeting. It's simple. You stand up, you say, I'm so sorry. I thought a decision maker would be present. There is no decision maker. Let's reschedule for when one can be available. Depending on the meeting, the law requires that certain roles are represented. You can look up who needs to be there depending on the meeting and request that they are. If your concern is that the choir director is excluding your child, make sure the choir director can be at the meeting. A decision maker, like I said, must always be present. By the same token, you can waive the requirement for certain people to be at the meeting if it will expedite situations. For example, I have a client who needed to be assessed. We didn't realize it until it was already June. We waived general education teacher and special ed teacher to be present at the preliminary meeting so that we could start assessments. We worked with the school psych directly. If we had had to wait for a gen ed teacher, we would not have started assessments until September. Not everyone knows this, and this is one of the most important things about an IEP. You can amend an IEP at any time. You can call a meeting and say, I would like to discuss changes to this IEP. Maybe your kid has blown through their goals and you need new goals. Maybe something isn't working. Maybe you have a new diagnosis or a tweak to a diagnosis that has changed something. Anytime you feel like the IEP is no longer appropriate, call a meeting, change the IEP. You can also ask for a team meeting at any time, not necessarily to change the IEP. I'm concerned that Sasha isn't getting the speech minutes that she is supposed to be getting. I would like to discuss that in a team meeting. Anytime you are concerned about something, call the team in. I'm going to say something very hard right now, and I'm sorry. This is the hardest part. Leave your emotions at the door. Whether it's a meeting or an email, an emotional response, yelling, swearing, etc., it's just wasting your child's time. Given that email, 24 hours will help. Don't send it until you've reread it and you've taken out the swear words. I tell my clients to call me and yell at me before meetings. Get it all out, do whatever you need to do. Listen to your angriest music. I suggest Rage Against the Machine for this purpose. But walk into the meeting calmly and professionally. It's okay to tear up. Everyone tears up. I still tear up at my daughter's meetings. Take Kleenexes with you. But if the meeting becomes about your emotions instead of your purpose for the meeting, you have lost an opportunity to help your child. The team will sit there quietly and console you and say, it's okay, I know this is so hard. If you can't control your emotions in a meeting, excuse yourself. Go to the restroom, get a glass of water, take a couple of deep breaths, remember why you're there, look at a picture of your child. Call me, yell at me. Even if I don't know you, you can just say, I'm in an IEP meeting. I can't handle this. Here's the worst string of curse words you've ever heard. I know a lot of people in the military. I won't be offended. Oh, gotta go back. I had some quick ideas that I hope people will want to talk about or respond to in the lightning round. So the first one is this. Never agree to a combined ETR IEP meeting. Schools will suggest it because it's efficient. The problem with this is that the ETR is the result of assessments that have just been done. It is impossible for you to read and process all the information from the ETR and make goals about it at the same time. It doesn't work. And it makes the meeting so long that you're worn down and you'll just agree to anything. Those meetings should be separate. Expect about an hour and a half to 2 hours for an ETR, 1 hour for an IEP meeting. If they're scheduling you for a combined ETR IEP and it's an hour long, there's something very wrong. Do not ever accept that meeting. If you have any concerns at all about a document, don't sign it. You can say, I will sign that I attended, but I would really like 24 hours to review this, to go over it with my husband or grandma or my advocate. Getting a second reading where everyone isn't staring at you is a really good plan. Go through it, highlight it, figure out where maybe they're just questions about things you didn't understand, and get those answered before you sign. At age 14, I will die on this hill. At age 14, the district is required to begin transition, secondary transition for your child. This is a much longer conversation than we have time for tonight, but if you have gotten to age 13 and no one has mentioned transition to you, you need to ask. You need to find out who the transition coordinator is, who is going to be heading it up, what the word means if you don't know, because it's an entire process to get your child into adulthood after they leave high school. There are goals that go with transition. If your child isn't yet in this process, make sure that it's happening for you. Probably most of you have kids too young for me to be mentioning this, but I'm going to stick it in the back of your head anyway. If you do not have guardianship and your student turns 18, the school will discuss graduation with them. So if you do not think that your student should be graduating at age 18, that they will need to stay until they're 22, consider guardianship. Or talk to your student about saying, no, I would like to remain. Schools will tell your child, don't you want to graduate with your friends? Don't you want to wear a pretty dress? Don't you want to walk across the stage? And they will agree, and now they've lost services. Make sure you are aware that your student can make that decision for themselves at age 18. Assessments, going back to assessments. If assessments don't seem to match what you know about your child, ask for information about that assessment. Ask if it was appropriate for your child. And I'll give you an example. My daughter was given an assessment that she did great on, and it was not expected. And it was because there was a typo in her age, and they had given her an assessment that was for a much younger child. It happens. People make mistakes. People make typos. But if you're seeing an assessment and it just doesn't make sense to you, find out if the person who gave the assessment was qualified to give the assessment. Sometimes they're not. Find out if accommodations were available and if accommodations were given. Try to figure out why the expectation does not match what the school saw. There are a lot of reasons why that could happen. FERPA. FERPA is the law that protects your child's privacy as it applies to the school. The school can only share your child's private details with people who need to know. Districts interpret that rule differently. Some districts provide that information to all staff who come in contact with your child, which is fantastic. Some school districts only give that information out to the gen ed teacher and the interventionist. Or if your child's older, their core class teachers and the interventionist. FERPA does not apply to you. You can give that information to anyone you want to give it to. I suggest giving that information to the bus driver and the lunch lady and the person out there with your child at recess and the hall monitor and the school secretary, because you don't want people to become angry at your child for behaving in a way that is appropriate for them to behave. It is helpful for the specials teachers to have that information. In addition, I like to give that information to teachers and ask them to put it in their subfolder. So if they have a substitute, the sub opens it, sees, oh, Jero has an IEP for a reading disability. It corrected it to, oh girl, has an IEP for a reading disability. And it's helpful for them to have that information right at their fingertips so that they know right away. Another thing you can do to aid in this, get an 8x10 of your child, blow it up, make 1 billion copies, and then on the back, bullet point with Sharpie, here are 5 great things about my kid. Here are some things my kid has difficulty with, and here's a little tip. So, for example, my child will become withdrawn or anxious. If that happens, try asking him about his favorite dinosaur. That will tend to bring my child out. So if you have little tips and tricks like that, for my daughter, it's Pokemon. I'm sure there's something for your kids too. So make sure that the school is aware of that, and putting it on the back of a gorgeous picture of your child is a great way to do it. These are some resources that I find helpful. So rights law, we'll talk about federal law. It will get into specifics. If you can go to a rights law training, I highly suggest that you do so. They're all over the country. Rights law is not specific to Ohio, but you can dive down to find links that will show you where to be in, like how to find the information for Ohio. adayinourshoes.com is parents talking to parents, giving advice. It's very helpful. It has a lot of great ideas. Again, it is not Ohio specific. Ocali.org is Ohio specific, and it will get into so much information. Where to find help, what to try, resources. Ocali is a great place to start for any question that you have. The ohio.gov special education link will get you into a ton of information that is written in plain English about forms that you may need or questions you might have. A lot of people ask me about the attendance law around children who have serious medical questions. are they going to get expelled, or is the truancy going to be a factor, etc. All of that you can find in this section of the ohio.gov site. It also has these fantastic email addresses that you can use to contact people and ask them questions. I use them all the time, and believe it or not, they respond. I just emailed them about some changes with the autism scholarship, and they got back to me. They explained it. It was brilliant. I told my client and, charged them for having done it. It was easy to do. And then again, shameless plug, northeastohioadvocates.com. My partner and I do everything from, I think my child may have a disability, they're in preschool, all the way through, I am an adult, I am in college, I am trying to get a job, I have a disability, and we do training and coaching, parent one-on-ones, we go to meetings. So that's where you can reach us. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so other people can talk, because I'm sure people are sick of me talking.
That is not true at all. But I am going to ask you, could you add on some information about behavior? So many of our kids have impulsive behaviors starting at a very early age. Many of them elope, it's like, I'm running off, I don't want to be doing this. So they avoid task by leaving or laying on the floor. There's just always something, and different teachers deal with that in different ways. And sometimes it's removal from the classroom. What can parents ask for as a proactive way to deal with those behaviors? What needs to be written in the IEP, and how much of it can be just given information, given as informal tips to the teacher? How limited are teachers as to how often and how long they remove our kids from the classroom for when they feel they're not being appropriate?
Sure. That's a lot of questions. I'm going to take the
Sorry.
first part first, which is a reminder that if the school is calling you and saying your child is behaving inappropriately, you need to come get them, or you need to come talk to them. Those hours that they are missing class time are suspension hours. They're not calling it a suspension. They don't mean for it to be a suspension. If your child is on an IEP, those count toward the limited number of suspension hours that they can have. So keep that in mind. It is important to remember that behaviors are communication. Talking to a teacher by saying, what is my child trying to communicate by this disruptive behavior? Can we please have someone come in and do a behavioral assessment to find the answer to that question? Will help with the problem. So make sure that they're doing a functional behavior assessment to figure out why Amy collapses on the floor and cries, or why Jonah picks something up and throws it. What is happening before that? It is the most important thing to find out what that child is trying to communicate. In the short term, it is very hard to have a student whose needs are not being met and they are acting out in a way that is dangerous. Excuse me. Having a child go to a sensory room to try and meet some of those needs is a huge help. I know they discourage that as kids get older, but I encourage it as kids get older. Maybe I need to go run the track. Maybe I need to go someplace where it's quiet and dark for 10 minutes. Maybe I need to go cry in the nurse's office to get the emotions out. We need to find out what that is, and having a conversation with your IEP team to discuss that. What have we tried? What does work? is important. And talking about what doesn't work, which I suggest would be yelling, trying to control, certainly laying hands on the child, is never a good idea. So communication with your team, like I said, you are the most important voice. Make sure you are leading that conversation. You can suggest, while we're waiting for the behavioral assessment, here are some things that work at home. Let's try those. I'm not sure if I answered every part of that question.
No, it was a very good general overview of the things that I know they were always a concern to me when my kids were in school, and I know that they continue to be of concern to parents because most of our kids demonstrate through their behavior exactly what they like and don't like about school. And the schools can't always provide one-on-one assistance or even two-on-one assistance, but sometimes our kids just need help. So thank you, Shari.
Yeah. I'll give an
Debbie?
example.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Gina.
Hi, it's Gina from Desanio. To kind of piggyback off Debbie, I have a quick question because I've heard this a couple of times. And my question is related to behavior. Are schools allowed to call a parent and tell them they have to, like, I think you kind of touched upon it, mention they call parent and say, you need to come pick up your child and take them home because of their behavior. So are they allowed to do that? And do you have to, I guess, do that? I mean, you have to leave work and go there and all of that. Because that hasn't happened to me, but I know some parents that it's happened to. And I'm just curious because I don't really know the correct answer to that.
It happens all the time.
Okay.
And the answer to that is sometimes.
Okay.
If the school cannot keep your child safe, if
Okay.
your child is in danger of harming themselves or others, they can tell you, we are not able to keep your child safe. You need to come get your child.
Okay. Okay.
If your child is, throwing things and they call you and say, come pick up your child, how I would respond is, I understand that you are suspending my student for the rest of the school day, however many hours that is,
Okay.
because it is a suspension. And
Okay.
I have asked for a functional behavior assessment. Can you please tell me where we are in that process? Because this has happened X amount of times, and we need to address what the problem is, what the antecedents are to my child's behavior so that he can receive appropriate education in the classroom.
Okay. Okay.
So,
yeah, that makes sense.
before you agree to come pick up your child, and every parent is different about this, if you don't want them
Right.
sobbing in the nurse's office, or you want to say, hey, you've got to learn to be able to handle this yourself. Everybody knows their own child best. But
Right.
be very clear with the school if they're asking you for that is suspension time and you are recording it as such.
Okay. Okay. Great. Great to know. That makes a lot of sense.
Sometimes it changes their attitude very quickly.
Yeah. Can imagine.
Shari,
Perfect.
it's Amy. Can you talk a little bit to the team, to everyone here, about how that affects like a manifestation finding and why it's important to record those hours as suspension hours and how that could affect things?
Sure. Thank you for pointing that out. So a student on an IEP, if they are having behaviors for which they are being suspended, or if they are in danger of being expelled, is entitled something called a manifestation determination review after a certain number of hours. You cannot suspend, Amy, correct me, 15 days?
Yeah, it's 10 days of
It's 10, okay.
consecutive. I believe it's consecutive suspension, but I think there's a case to be made for 10 days period.
Cumulative, yeah.
Cumulative.
I think it does become cumulative, so that if you reach that threshold, the school has to hold a meeting to say, is this behavior because of the disability? Is this a manifestation of my child's disability? If the answer is yes, the school cannot expel them and they need to address the behavior. I'll give you examples of how this would work. I have a client who is autistic. He has echolalia. He was sitting in the bleachers after school on school property watching a practice of some kind of sports ball. And kids in the bleachers next to him were playing a game on their phones, and someone said, kill them all, kill them all. And my client picked up kill them all, and was just saying it, sitting there saying it over and over and over. And a girl walked by in the bleachers, heard him say it, reported it to the school, and they wanted to expel him because they have a zero tolerance policy for that kind of language. We had a manifestation determination review meeting, and it was determined that he was not threatening anyone, that what he was saying was because of his echolalia, which is a manifestation of his autism. And there was no repercussion for that. By contrast, if you are on IEP for speech and you're selling drugs in the parking lot, that is not a manifestation, and you can be expelled for that. Was that clear? Did that make sense? Okay.
Sure did.
Thank you, ma'am.
Anyone else have questions? Feel free to unmute and ask. Nobody, huh?
Oh, Jen Lombardi is typing.
Okay.
Says, what inclusion rules? Oh, sorry. What inclusion rules apply to programs only associated with the school? Specifically, the before care program hosted in the gym is fighting or ignoring our emails because of potty training requirements, but also thinking ahead to after school sports, chess, etc.
That's a great question, because if
Yes.
it's on school property and it's run by the school, are they required to provide the least restrictive environment and not leave that child out due to disability?
If it is run by the school, is the answer to that. If it is a private organization that is just offering the service before or after school, then no, unless they are accepting government funds. So if it was Head Start or something along those lines that were having an after school program, then yes, because it's a government program. But if it's, we are a fun organization that likes to hang out with kids before school and we are privately owned and privately funded, then no, LRE does not apply to them.
That makes sense.
But looking at after school sports and chess, etc., if it is a school function or in any way receives government funding, then yes, they do have to provide services. There's a part of your IEP that it's like the second to last page before the signatures start that says this child is allowed to participate in extracurricular activities the same as any other child, provided that they meet the qualifications. So if they want to be on the football team, can they qualify for the football team? But yes, they do have to be included, and if they need support, support has to be provided. Jen, did that answer your question?
Well, she added on, does before school care count as daycare, which would be covered? But doesn't that go back to who's providing it?
Find out who's paying for it. If it's a private organization and it is being paid for by you, then no, LRE does not apply to them.
So I just took a swallow so I can talk now. So I was always under the assumption that private daycares, whether they were hosted by a church or a private organization, were always required to admit your student and accommodate their needs, so long as it wasn't like building an entire new playground that would be handicap accessible, for example. So my thought was, if that applies to daycares, isn't before school care essentially like a daycare, or does that not count once they become school age?
It doesn't apply to daycares unless they're accepting government funding. Hopefully they're doing that. They should be doing that. They are, in my opinion, morally obligated to do that. But lots of kids are kicked out of preschool for behaviors. And if it's a private preschool, they can make that decision.
I was always under the assumption it was part of the ADA Act.
ADA,
Not really.
no. ADA says that anything that is government funded cannot discriminate against anyone with a disability. It does not apply to private organizations, unfortunately. It should.
It goes back to that same thing, is the money, are they accepting any money from the government for operations? Or are they completely funded by private investors?
If
And
they accept $1 of one
That-
grant from the state of Ohio, then yes, it applies.
Yeah.
So find out if they're getting any grants from the state of Ohio. That happens too. Okay, let's see. We've got one from Brad and Kathy. Can the school suddenly change the child's teacher because she is needed to support, oh, I just lost it, another function at the school? This change happened quickly because the ODE is requiring dyslexia training, so they suddenly pulled our intervention specialist because no one else is trained. Now our daughter will be with a large class with 2 certified teachers, no intervention specialist. It depends on what your IEP says specifically about your child's placement. If it does not say that your child will be in a room with an interventionist, if it says co-taught can be 2 typical teachers. You need to go read that section. Again, it's toward the back of your IEP about placement and least restrictive environment, and see what it says. If it says that they need the support of an intervention specialist, then you are correct. They cannot pull that teacher. See. Amy is clarifying the extracurriculars law in a post or in a link. So thank you very much.
thanks, Amy.
And Jen, I will read that ADA link that you sent. It's find out where their money is coming from, is because they can't discriminate against a person with a disability, but they can say, we accept the following types of students who do not have behaviors. Many schools do that. Think about Julie Billiard, the Lawrence School, lots of private Catholic schools, lots of preschools will throw a child out for behaviors. So it's very important to make sure that you can find the one drop of money that is coming from the state to be able to make your case. Because the student not meeting the requirements of the school is different than we are discriminating against a student because they have a disability. It's a tricky clarification, but that's how they get around it. But I will read what you posted. Thank you.
Can I pop in, or would you rather I didn't? I had
Yes,
a
please,
comment
please,
about
please.
the ADA preschool. I will just say that I think where I see the misunderstanding around that is that you can't just make a blanket assumption about a child based on anything. You have to make an individual assessment, meaning you have to look at each private preschool does have an obligation under the ADA to make an assessment individually for each child, but they have every right to say we can't accommodate that child. Whereas in a public setting, you don't have a right. There's no right to say we can't educate your child. They are legally bound to educate your child. Does that clarification make any sense, Jen? The difference there?
You said it much more
They do have to
clearly
make it.
than I did.
Well, you
It-
just
it
have to make
does.
an individual assessment. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a couple of years since I've read this when we had the daycare fight. But
Mhm.
to me, the examples I remember from the article were like, for example, putting a potty changing station in a 5-year-old room is a reasonable request that everybody must make. Redoing the entire playground, which would be $100,000 to accommodate a wheelchair, is not a reasonable request. So I don't know if they go down to granular detail, but
yeah.
those were kind of the examples they gave.
It becomes very sticky because it's really a private preschool has the right to make the determination based on their own metrics, which, that's why we have laws, that's why we have IDEA, because, and we need we need faith because we need places that are obligated to educate children no matter what their disability, and they don't have that discernment
Mhm.
piece available to them.
Yeah.
Whereas the
Lots of
preschool can say, no, we can't do it. Sorry, and then your cost, that's they can say that this is is an unreasonable request to make. Whereas a public school doesn't have that right. They are obligated to educate your child.
Yeah, I think I'm just
Is
extra
that- is that
frustrated
any-
because they like interviewed
Yeah.
providers for this. They chose this provider. They let the provider use their space. Like it's very much integrated with the school, like except for being paid for by the school. So I'll take it up with the principal.
Well, they're not doing, and they're clearly not doing the right thing. But there isn't going to be a legal discussion that will hold water, but they're not doing the right thing ethically, in my opinion.
I agree. But lots of preschools will say we do not take kids who are not potty trained. As long as they're private and they're not taking any money from the state or federally, they can do that. They can make that decision. I wish it
Okay.
wasn't that way, but it is.
Shari, I have a question that is a question I've gotten from a few parents, but it's not related to this discussion. But if our kiddo with Down syndrome shows also that they have characteristics of autism, which are very specific, and the behaviors are based on both communication needs and academic needs. So
Mhm.
let's say the intervention specialist is using the standards to say, okay, your child needs to learn the alphabet and how to sound out words, and which is and providing a lot of oral instruction versus visual instruction. Is there a way to kind of like get the interventionist and the classroom teachers to provide instruction that is more tailored toward those academic needs of a person with a dual diagnosis? Because just being in special ed is obviously not going to be the magic cure. You have to
Right.
provide very specific interventions, but not everybody recognizes that people with Down syndrome, as we said, can have characteristics of autism and can learn very much like a person with autism just because of their own hearing processing issues as well. So what can we do as parents to, and I wear both hats as a former intervention specialist, but what can parents do to get the kind of instruction that better meets their child's needs without making, huge enemies of the teachers involved?
So I know you know this, and it's important to keep in mind that regardless of the diagnosis, the school needs to provide support for all of the needs. So it becomes important to demonstrate that this child has those needs. Again, I come back to here's a report from the doctor, here are diagnoses, here are what our private therapists are saying. We can demonstrate that our student is able to do these things and needs support in these other things. I would ask for additional assessment from the school so that they can prove to themselves what supports are needed. I think a lot of people don't think about Down syndrome and autism combination, and it needs to be pointed out to them. It needs to be said, our doctor has suggested to us that both things are present. We need to understand and make sure we are meeting his individual needs, and we are providing him specifically with appropriate education to him. Not all students with Down syndrome learn the same way. So saying, I would like to reassess in these areas and be very specific about what you want to look for, bring backup from the doctor or whoever your support people are. If they say no, I would ask for an IEE, for an independent educational evaluation from a third party, because places that do that, for example, KidsLink, have researched how Down syndrome and autism work together and sometimes butt heads. They know this maybe better than the people who would do the assessment from the district. So if you're not getting support from the district on this topic, do not be afraid to ask for an independent educational evaluation. That should not burn a bridge, because it is a very commonly used tool to help the family get on the same page as the school. And the school should provide a list of places that will provide IEEs that they have already pre-approved. You pick one, the district pays for it, hopefully. Almost always they pay for it. And then you can get some extra assessment so that everyone is then on the same page for what that student needs, instead of, I think I know what Down syndrome is and I think I know what a student with Down syndrome needs.
Good. And then a follow-up to that is, let's say my child has severe communication needs and I think he needs more than speech, 30 minutes a week.
Mhm.
And the school says, and you and I have both heard this often, with schedules the way they are, this is all we can fit them in for. I was always under the understanding that they were supposed to meet my kids' needs. I wasn't supposed to be meeting their scheduling needs. So then how does a parent finesse getting more of the speech that their child should be getting?
Exactly the way that you just said it. My child's individual educational plan needs to address their individual needs for appropriate education for them. Having them sit in a classroom where they cannot communicate or understand the communication that is being provided is not appropriate education. I think when you speak in the language that the district respects, because you know what you're talking about, it makes a big difference. When I lecture at CSU, I talk about parents who are head nodders, who sit in meetings and do this. Those are the parents who become very surprised at age 17 that their child doesn't know how to read. You need to make sure that you have educated yourself, that you understand the right questions to ask the school to get the support. There are people who can help you with that. There are many of them. I am one of them. Your parent mentor is one of them. There are other organizations that can help you know the right words to say. And then again, I come back to, if you cannot agree between the school and the family on what those communication needs are, ask for an IEE strictly to look at communication. Have a specialist do that work. It's an incredible tool and not enough people use it.
Thank you.
You're
Gina, are
welcome.
there any other questions that come up that maybe we should be asking Shari and Amy?
Sorry, my internet was everyone was frozen there for a second. Most of the questions I get are related to behavior. That's a big one with the parents who email me. I haven't had any big emails yet. Inclusion is the other one. Many of our parents want our kids included in the gen ed classroom, and some districts are really great with agreeing to that and working on it and providing the accommodations, and some are not. And so I think that's another big issue some of our parents have, is the inclusion issue and how it would look and what they're expected to do, the schools. So that's a big one.
Gina,
and
I
know-
have a really effective tool for that,
Oh,
for
good.
inclusion in the classroom.
Okay.
So I have quite a few clients who have Down syndrome, and I love to go in and sit down with the team and say, okay, I would like to go through every 15-minute increment for every school day, find out where the student is, and if they are not with their general education classmates, why that is happening. And I make a grid and I write it down. Some schools, when they know I'm coming to do this, actually provide that grid to me, which is fantastic, because then you're able to say, okay, why isn't Benjamin in art with his typical peers? Well, because he's not able to copy a Van Gogh. Okay, so it's not going to affect the classwork for him to use the color palette of Van Gogh to do his own thing. So as we go through those 15-minute increments, it makes very apparent the holes. Why isn't he in class with his typical peers for silent reading? Well, he's not reading The Giver. Okay. He can read another book. He can look at a picture book if he's not reading. Why can't he be with his typical peers? One of the things I find the most important is for a student to be in the classroom with their typical peers as much of the time as possible. Allows those typical peers to see that student as a friend, an employee, a boss in the future. So they've grown together. Like, I grew up with my uncle and never thought of him as any different than any other person when it came time to do the dishes and it was his turn. But it is extremely important that you see a person as capable and you don't get that experience if what the school is telling you is that that student doesn't even deserve to be with the general population. There has to be a reason why the student isn't with their general ed classmates for every minute that they're not there. And doing this grid and saying why for this 15-minute block is he not with his typical peers is a great way to discover places where you can say, okay, we're not sure about his capability. We should be assuming that he can. And then finding out, okay, he needs to work with a gait trainer, and that's not something that can be done in the gen ed classroom. So that's a reasonable reason for him not to be in the room. Or he is working on a specific set of skills that aren't being taught in the classroom for that brief period of time. Maybe he's in another room. But for all other minutes, they need to justify not why he can be in the gen ed room, but why he's not in the gen ed room.
That's okay. That's a really good tool for for sure. I think we had a question, Debbie, that just popped up on chat. I lost it though.
She just asked, what's the event that leads up to the request for the 15-minute increment grid? And it's not actually an event, it's the request for an inclusive learning environment versus being stuck in a special ed classroom or alternate environment during the school day.
For me, what leads up to that request is if my client says to me, I want my child to spend more time in the typical classroom. They spend all day in a resource room, and I know they can learn. That is when I sit down with the team and tell them, this is what we're going to do. And I see you're asking, is that something an advocate would do or who? I'm happy to help you do that. You can contact me. I'll help you either do it or figure out how to do it. Or you can ask them yourself and see if they're willing to work with you on it.
And this kind of goes full circle because this is a request you would put in writing, or you would reconvene the IEP team to amend the IEP to include general education minutes, because that's supposed to be specified on the IEP as well. How much time is given specifically to special education intervention, and the rest is assumed to be general education. So that's like a full circle moment.
Thank you. You know what? I took myself off of mute. I figured it would be easier to have the live conversation versus via chat. So my name is Sime, and I have a child with Down syndrome who is entering into the 6th grade. So this is his first year in middle school. We have had an advocate actually that we've worked with since elementary, just because we had some challenges early on because he not only had Downs, but had apraxia of speech. So he was nonverbal for the longest time. And so I had never heard of that approach, and I didn't catch the first part of when you were talking, so I wasn't sure in what context that plays out. Our son he does a lot of pull out, but I do ensure that he has a fair amount of time in the classroom, because I agree with all the points that you called out, that is how he learns, that's how the other students learn. And I forgot where I was going with that. There was probably another question there. Oh, just I guess a statement that, being transitioned now into middle school, this is a whole new team. I have 1 or 2 specialists that are following him, but I have no idea what his day is going to unfold, what it's going to be like, how it's all going to unfold, and if they're going to treat him with the same level of respect and inclusion that they did through his elementary school years.
I really suggest calling a meeting of the new team before school starts, if at all possible, or as soon as close to the first day of school as you can get it, and say exactly that. I need to know how my son will be spending his day. Can we go through a grid and you can show me where he will be, when he will be with his typical peers, when he will be pulled out, and why he's being pulled out at that time? It's a great way to build confidence in the team, that they understand everyone's on the same page, that it is important to you that he be with his typical peers as much as possible. Shockingly, a lot of parents will never ask that question. If you go and look in his IEP at the least restrictive environment, it will explain to you at what point he is having general education and resource room or pullouts, and how that's divided up. It will give you a good idea of what the school is thinking. And if you need to change that, it's okay to say, I want to revisit this because I think it's more important that he's in the gen ed classroom.
I think it's also important to recognize that in elementary school and middle school and high school, there are different variants and and I'm not saying that you should not advocate for your child. I'm just simply saying it's really important to know how a middle school environment is different than an elementary school environment, and how a high school environment is different than a middle school environment. And I don't think that schools do the best job educating parents about the transitions between or among the three areas. And it's really, really important for parents to say, hey, middle school is going to be so different. And it is. I mean, we know that just from typically developing students, but it's also really, really different in a different way for students with disabilities. And it's just a really important conversation to have, because the laws change too, about what what is expected at age 14. There's just a lot of things, and unfortunately, I think as a teacher, we're not given the time and the ability to educate parents about the differences between, or the different levels. And it's such an important thing to understand.
It really is. Excuse me. It really is. Have that meeting with your team as soon as you can possibly get it. Find out how it's going to be different.
Because it will be.
Thank you, ladies. Yeah, we met at the end of the last school year. So in the spring, right before school let out, we met with the new team and then agreed that we would wait a few weeks until the kids got settled in, to kind of just see how he is adapting, and we'll have a meeting within the first few weeks. So I will definitely be reaching out to make sure we get something on the calendar. And I figure, again, I try to be as fair as I can all around the table. So I want to give the teachers a chance to get settled in. I want to give our son a chance to, again, get settled in. And so I agree with all your points and appreciate your guidance on that.
But
It is
I do
perfectly.
think that you can say ahead of time, it's like, walk me through what the day looks like. Walk me through what the quarters look like, because it's new for all parents. And regardless of whether you have a typically developing or atypical developing student, and it's okay to ask those questions and insist that that the administration and teachers acknowledge that you are making this transition from one building to the next, and the expectations are different. And it's okay to say, what do I need to know? Tell me.
Yeah, they did give me a draft to give me a sense of what his day would look like. I reached out actually as recent as today, this afternoon, to find out where his schedule was, because they assured me that we'd have it at the end of July, early August, but apparently they're not having any of the kids. Well, I shouldn't say not any, but a large number of the students won't be receiving their schedules until next week, right before school starts. So I'm out in the Strongsville School District, and they apparently are very behind.
Yeah,
ask your parent mentor. They will help you.
Right.
You have a good parent mentor.
Right. And I do think schedules are the hardest thing to accommodate as a school district. And you would always think that they should be able to plug in all the elements and make it happen. And yet there are a variety of reasons why it doesn't. But I love that you are asking them and being, saying, where are we on this? Because it keeps them on their toes, and that's important.
Agreed. Thank you, ladies. I do have to jump. Very helpful. Thank you.
I'll just hop in to say that I don't feel that those preschool meetings are at all adversarial, and I don't think teams receive them that way. I
Right.
don't want anyone to feel nervous about doing that, because I think it can set the tone of the team. I have a meeting with a family tomorrow that's a preschool meeting with just the administration. There's not teachers who can be involved. But I want them to understand the tone that I intend to set as an advocate, and that you can start building the framework of what might and might not happen. You can ask all your questions. You can get ahead of some difficult situations if you have the meeting before school or within the first couple of
Absolutely.
days.
No,
There's
I-
nothing adversarial about that,
Absolutely not. And
and
you
that
know
I
what?
just wanted to
Having-
make that clear. Yeah.
Having those meetings before the kids show up is so important, because once there are feet on the ground, everybody is running at full tilt. And teachers and administrators, I would say on the most part, want to do and work with parents. And so have that meeting when the stress level is the least.
Yes. And again, it's how you approach it. Be businesslike, be professional, have specific things that you need to
Yes.
know. Do not come in adversarially. Do not come in with, why don't I have my schedule yet?
Right.
And if you are hostile, they will become defensive. If you come in and say, we just really want to understand what my students' day will look like, how this will be different than previous years, any help you can give us would be appreciated. Those are incredibly reasonable requests, and I think
Absolutely.
the school will respect you for asking and wanting to know that. You're not the
Absolutely.
first person to have asked.
I agree. I unfortunately need to go, but thank you so much. I think this was lovely, and I'd love to be involved in anything else you do.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I was out by you picking mushrooms today. I know you're too sick to go, but we should go soon.
We will. I think that's because I know we picked mushrooms in the spring, but I need to know more about other times to forage, which I'm excited to learn. All right.
Good. Feel better.
Thank you. Feel better.
I did not take a nap today, so I feel like that is a huge plus.
Good, good.
All right. Take care, everybody. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you. Shari, thanks so much for your time. I did forget to mention in the introduction that you're not just an expert school advocate, you're an expert on mushrooms as well. So that's
We all have to
important.
have a weird hobby, right?
Hey, that's good. It makes you so well-rounded though, who would ever think?
Yeah.
But at any rate, we appreciate you. We appreciate you, Amy, and the information that you provided tonight hopefully will help the parents just go forward in a more positive way, and in a way where they feel more confident talking about what their child needs and getting those needs met. So again, thank you so very much. If anyone else has any other questions, I could always forward them to Shari and Amy. But have a great night, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.